Cinco de Mayo. In case you weren't aware or didn't know, here we are. Yes. Good morning, good morning. I'm Reverend Mary Shelton. I'm the senior minister here at Golden Gate Center for Spiritual Living. I am delighted to see how the congregation has grown since 10 o'clock. When I started at 10 o'clock, I thought, oh, well, everybody took this Sunday off. But it looks like people are still coming in. This is good. We're getting a fair number showing up. This is great. So happy to see you all this morning. And I just want to let you know, whether you're new or you've been here a lot, whoever you are, wherever you may be on your pathway of faith, you are welcome here. And I am delighted to look out and see all of you this morning. I had the most wonderful time away, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in a few minutes. But first, let's see. Oh, that's fascinating. This month, we're celebrating compassion. And we're looking into the idea of supporting the poor. And I'll talk next week a little bit about who are the poor. But right now, we're looking at compassion. And so the question for us this morning is, do you feel what I feel? This is how we know that we're experiencing compassion from another person, because they reflect back to us an understanding or a willingness or desire to understand what it is that we're feeling. And so we had, Amanda and I, had the most wonderful time at this wedding. So this, for those of you that were not here while Reverend Carol Huntley was the minister, this is her son, Michael. I have known Michael since he was about 3. And this is his bride, Terry, and we were in Pennsylvania for their wedding. And so here's Reverend Carol and Reverend Lloyd, and this is the program for the ceremony. Right here you can see Reverend Lloyd did a prayer, and down here Reverend Carol did the community vows for everyone. It was very, very windy, and we were outdoors. And what she said later was, part of what she said because the wind was irritating her so much. But what she said was so great in the community vows. One of the things she said to us was, with all of this wind, I'm just thinking of it as traveling around the world and gathering up all the blessings for this couple that are anywhere in anybody's mind or heart. So if the wind comes up during the ceremony and you can't hear what's being said, just consider it's delivering more blessings. And I thought that was great. So that was really fun. Here we all are. This is what happens to me in bright sunlight. I had taken my sunglasses off for just a minute, but it was like we were going downhill fast. I said, you're going to have to take that quick. So, and this is Carol and Paul at the reception. And so that was part of it. And I did not bring it to show you this morning, but Melanie and her fiance were there too. But Michael and Terry had been taking salsa dance lessons so they could dance. And they did their first dance together. And when I get it worked out, I'll play it for you, but not today. It was very dear, and they did a great job. So with compassion, what we experienced was we saw them, and they saw us. And we were there to witness them and to experience their joy with one another. And when we enter into that feeling, it's as if we are entering into their experience. It's as if it's us that we're experiencing. We're imagining how it feels as we're looking at them. We're thinking about what that's like. So it seems a 97-year-old woman died. She had no family or friends that survived her. And so as far as the folks at the funeral home could determine, she had no particular religious affiliation. But they still wanted to provide something in the way of a memorial service for her. So they phoned a nearby church and they spoke to a young priest. And he said certainly he would be delighted to come to the cemetery and do a service for her. And he was sad for her a little bit, but there was no one to be there. But he was excited because this was going to be his very first memorial funeral service. And so when the time came, he drove to the cemetery. He had a little bit of trouble finding the grave, but finally he came upon it, and he was saddened again to see that there was no one there for her. There was just a large hole with a cement box in it, and he spotted some workers nearby with shovels in hand and realized they were probably waiting for him, but he did not want to be rushed. He wanted to do this well for her, give her a wonderful tribute. So he prayed long and loud around the grave. He sprinkled holy water and even sang Amazing Grace in his beautiful, rich baritone voice. And satisfied, finally, he nodded to the workers across the way and left. And there was a pause. And then one worker turned to the other with a puzzled expression on his face, and he said, "You know, I've been putting septic tanks in the ground for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like that before." I think that this priest was mirroring with a sense of compassion and empathy what this memorial should be like for this woman. And so he did it for her, even though he was nowhere near where she actually was. She didn't know the difference, and that was just great. So, funeral for a septic tank, yes, that can happen. When I looked up the definition of compassion, I wasn't so happy with it. It said, the act or capacity for sharing the painful feelings of another implies pity coupled with an urgent desire to aid or to spare from suffering, to suffer with. And I thought, compassion isn't just about when we're suffering. Compassion is about our connections with each other, our sense of community, our desire to and willingness to meet another with understanding, to be in the experience with them or be in the understanding of the experience with them. And so I would call it to listen with the heart. That to me is more like compassion, to listen with the heart. Because what happens with us is that we all have mirror neurons in our brains. Mirror neurons do several things for us. One thing they do for us that's very important is they help us to learn. Because as we watch someone else do something, we are mirroring it in our own brains as if we were doing it. Our brains have the same activity in them as they have when we actually do that ourselves. So as we watch, depending on our relationship with the person or our feeling about the situation, our mirror neurons are activated, and we're in that experience with them. You ever been in a movie where you were so into it that you couldn't believe 2 hours had gone by? You didn't even notice the passage of time because you had gone to another time and space with those people. I remember at the end of Dances with Wolves, I was like, I want to go with them. The movie's over, but I have to go back to my life, and I kind of like what they're headed for. And, it's part of the wonder of books or music or poetry or movies that we can enter into another experience. And so when we're watching something, those mirror neurons get set off so that we feel with the other person, or we can feel what that feels like, what that is like to do, to experience. The memorial service that I did yesterday for this veteran, this man was absolutely coded to service. That was what he was about all the time in his life. From the time he was 12 years old, he had been in an accident with a power saw at age 12. 3 of his fingers got cut off. They put them back on. He didn't lose them. They were reattached. But as he went back week after week for his, or I don't know how often each week, for his physical therapy, he would always make sure and find someone else, some other patient that he did not already know, and he would encourage them and tell them his story and help them to feel they could get through this. That is compassion in action. And I think of compassion also as another word for love. Ernest Holmes, this always makes me laugh, but this quote is from our founder, Ernest Holmes, in the Science of Mind textbook. He says, one of the first things to do is to love everybody. If you have not done this, begin to do so at once. That's what always makes me laugh. There is always more good than bad in people, and seeing the good tends to bring it forth. Love is the grandest healing and drawing power on earth. It is the very reason for our being. Love is the sole impulse for creation. From selfish reasons alone, if from no loftier reason, we cannot afford to find fault, to hate, or even to hold in mind anything against any living soul. This seems to me to be a ginormous assignment, actually. He says it so easily. If you have not done this, begin to do so immediately, to love everybody. And Dostoevsky said, you must love all that God has created, both his entire world and every single grain of sand in it. Love each tiny leaf, each beam of sunshine. You must love the animals, love every plant. If you love all things, you will also attain the divine mystery that is in all things. For then your ability to perceive the truth will grow every day, and your mind will open itself to an all-embracing love. Isn't that beautiful? So clearly we have these mirror neurons for a reason. They're not accidental. We don't quite understand exactly all that they're supposed to do or what happens if they're not exactly all tuned up like they should be. But what we do know is that they do help us learn, they help us develop empathy, and they maximize benefits to the community at large, because it doesn't take as long to learn something or to become connected to one another because we have these mirror neurons. I want to share this little story with you because one of the things about compassion is the importance of having compassion also for ourselves. This is one you've heard before. A water bearer in India had 2 large pots, each hung on each end of a pole which he carried across his neck. One of the pots had a crack in it, and while the other pot was perfect and always delivered a full portion of water at the end of the long walk from the stream to the master's house, the cracked pot arrived only half full. For a full 2 years, this went on daily, with the water bearer delivering only 1.5 pots full of water to his master's house. Of course, the perfect pot was proud of its accomplishments, perfect for the end to which it was made. But the poor cracked pot was ashamed of its own imperfection and miserable that it was able to accomplish only half of what it had been made to do. After 2 years of what it perceived to be a bitter failure, it spoke to the water bearer one day by the stream. I am ashamed of myself, and I want to apologize to you. Why? Asked the bearer. What are you ashamed of? I have been able for these past 2 years to deliver only half my load, because this crack in my side causes water to leak out all the way to your master's house. Because of my flaws, you have to do all of this work and you don't get the full value from your efforts, the pot said. The water bearer felt sorry for the old cracked pot, and in his compassion he said, as we return to the master's house today, I want you to notice the beautiful flowers along the path. And indeed, as they went up the hill, the old cracked pot took notice of the sun warming the beautiful wild flowers on the side of the path. And this cheered it some, but at the end of the trail it still felt bad because it had again leaked half its load. So again, it apologized to the water bearer for its failure. And the bearer said to the pot, did you notice that there were flowers only on your side of the path, but not on the other pot's side? That's because I have always known about your flaw, and I took advantage of it. I planted flower seeds on your side of the path, and every day while we walk back from the stream, you've watered them. For 2 years, I have been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate my master's table. Without you being just the way you are, he would not have had this beauty to grace his house. Each of us has our own flaws. We're all cracked pots. But if we allow it, God uses our flaws to grace the divine table. And as we seek ways of community together, and as God calls us to the tasks appointed for us, don't be afraid of our flaws. Don't be afraid of your flaws. Because we never know what the divine economy of God is doing with those flaws, not only to help us learn, but to help others learn and to actually create gifts. Sometimes the flaws that we have wind up creating greater gifts in the world than if we were all absolutely perfect. So the question comes to us, once we are seeing others in this way, once we are putting ourselves in their shoes, in their place, with discernment rather than judgment, seeing what is and recognizing that's not the whole story. That's a snapshot of this person's experience right at this moment temporarily, and a snapshot of mine right now temporarily. Our situations could be reversed, other things might happen, but this is what it is at this moment. And so, what am I called to? What am I to do now? Now that namaste has become real. Now that when I look at you, I see my reflection. Now that when I look at you, I look at me and look at God. And when I look at myself in the mirror, rather than seeing who I thought I was, I see you and I see God. What am I to do now? Oh dear, now what do I do? Well, now I begin to understand you. You know, when I do a wedding ceremony, I say, getting to know another person doesn't happen in a short time. It's usually something we achieve only after years of intimacy. And the wonderful knowledge of another person grows out of really caring for the other so much that we want to understand as completely as possible what the other person is feeling. And to be known in this way is of priceless value. So we want to understand each other, and we want to be understood. Sometimes we learn to communicate in ways that are designed not to allow the other to understand us, but in an attempt to impress the other, which may confuse them, it may impress them, it may make them feel less than, but not necessarily to understand us. So when we know that understanding is this huge gift, then we want to be understood and we want to understand. And then, as we feel that way, we want to collaborate. We want to create together. We want to make more outcomes better, sooner for everyone. And so it becomes a growth experience for us, for the community, and by extension then, to our world. Emmett Fox, who was one of the early metaphysicians, wrote this. I love this. I find this so beautiful. There is no difficulty that enough love will not conquer. No disease that enough love will not heal. No door that enough love will not open. No gulf that enough love will not bridge. No wall that enough love will not throw down. No sin that enough love will not redeem. It makes no difference how deeply seated may be the trouble, how hopeless the outlook, how muddled the tangle, how great the mistake. A sufficient realization of love will dissolve it all. If only you could love enough, you would be the happiest and most powerful being in the world. Truly, there's no greater power and no greater gift we have than the gift of love. And it can be as simple as random acts of kindness that we do for each other in the world. Teilhard de Chardin said, "Love alone is capable of uniting living beings in such a way as to complete and fulfill them. For it alone takes them and joins them by what is deepest in themselves. And we certainly could see this in the vows that Michael and Terry exchanged last weekend. And then he says, someday, after mastering the wind, the waves, and the tides, we shall harness for God the power of love. And then, for the second time in history, we will have discovered fire. So I want to conclude with this little story, this wonderful little story. It's called My Silent Keeper by Kevin Harter. He says, my brother, Michael Patrick Harter, was born in Hollywood on December 9th, 1956, a month before his due date. Doctors told my parents only that because he was premature, it would take some time for Mike to catch up. However, 6 months after Mike's birth, a nurse noticed his slow mental and physical development. It was more than a minor disability, she told my parents. He had Down syndrome, and he also had cerebral palsy. Overwhelmed, my mom and dad went to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, in the spring of 1957, looking for the kind of medical miracle they believed the clinic's doctors performed, but they could do nothing. Nothing for Mike, nor could they ever fully explain why he never lost his baby teeth, never grew taller than about 30 inches, never weighed more than 28 pounds. They did estimate, however, that he would not live to see his 12th birthday. In May 1958, I was born in Austin, Minnesota, a blue-collar town framed by cornfields. I was healthy and grew up to be big and fast. As a boy, I learned to feed and clothe Mike. As a teenager, I babysat for my big brother and learned the proper dosage of medicine to prevent the seizures that caused him to stiffen and tremble. In my favorite photo, we're on the steps of our new home wearing red baseball hats and toothy smiles. I'm standing next to Mike, and between us are Midge, a Pomeranian, and Happy Hank, a basset hound. Animals understood Mike. If other kids pulled our dog's tails or ears, they would move out of range or snap, but never with Mike. And if the dogs thought he was in danger, they always came to his defense. Mike found special things he loved to hold and play with: a yellow rose, a small flag, a pinwheel, wind chimes. The ideal for Mike was to sit near the window with a bowl full of M&Ms, sunshine streaming across his face. Many people said he would never walk or talk and should be institutionalized. He never did learn to walk, but he did learn to talk, not flawlessly, or even in complete sentences, but he had the basics down. If he was hungry, thirsty, happy, or sad, we knew. Cake, cookies, candy bar, water, water, cry. He knew names, too. I was Kagan, not Kevin, but that changed with a beard I grew during the summer before college. Family members said it was ugly. The name stuck. Look who's home. Who's that? They'd say to Mike. Ugly, he would respond and squeal with delight. All of which to me was normal, for he was the only brother I knew. The only time I thought of the difference between us was when others pointed them out. His effect on some people was special, however. Big, tough men crumbled when he smiled, giggled, and winked at them. One in particular, a bear of a man who had been on the wrong side of the law more than once, always asked after him. He'd often give Mom a few dollars and tell her, "Get something for the little guy, will you?" For anyone who took the time, Mike softened them like butter in the afternoon sun. My circle of friends widened when I entered high school. One day, Mom asked if my new friends would have a problem seeing Mike for the first time. If they don't accept Mike, they don't accept me, and they aren't welcome, I said. And if I didn't think of him as different, I never thought about him dying either. That changed on a warm fall night in 1975. I had made my first varsity football start. We won 7-6. And after the game, I celebrated with my friends at the local hangout. The phone rang, and I was paged. "No need to worry. Everything's okay. Don't rush home," said my mom. But Mike had a seizure and is in the hospital. With this first seizure, Mike's life was beginning to fade. His immune system was defenseless. His seizures intensified and became more frequent. His bones would break with little cause. His lungs often filled with fluid. As his arms grew weak and his life flickered, Mike lost the strength to lift a rose and the resistance to sit by an open window. Like the flowers he loved, Mike was too fragile to stand a frost. As his health faded and college took me away, Mike would show his disapproval of my absence by ignoring me and pouting when I returned. My greatest sin was growing up and moving out. Maybe it was then that he realized there was a difference between us. Toward the end of his life, the promise of spring was near, but Mike would not make it through yet another hospital stay. A bout with pneumonia quietly squeezed life from him. Mike slipped in and out of coma on March 15, 1983, Dad's 50th birthday. As though he knew the importance of that date, he battled for one more day. Michael Patrick Harter, just 26 years old, died at sunrise the next day. In Mom's arms, Dad nearby, surrounded by those he loved. I put a few things in Mike's casket to be buried with him. My favorite picture of us with our dog, a bag of M&Ms, a stuffed animal, and a radio. We never had those great soul-searching talks other brothers have about women, religion, work, parents, Vietnam. We never played catch, never talked about our dreams or double dated for homecoming or prom. I would get older, maybe one day marry and have kids, but Mike would be an everlasting innocent. It has been 13 years since he died, but each year in some way, I find new meaning in my life as a result of Mike. He taught me compassion and strength. He taught me respect for those less fortunate than myself, and he taught me an appreciation of the beauty in simple things. Children who come into the world with mental or physical disabilities are considered by some to be abnormal. Others may regard them as the select children of God. Mike was one of those. Physically and mentally, I was my brother's keeper. Spiritually, Mike was and is my keeper, a nearly silent, soulful guardian angel. What does it feel like to us? What happens when we receive understanding? When we receive welcome? Well, we feel home. We feel safe. We feel like we belong and we want to help. We can relax and be who we are, knowing that we're loved exactly as we are. So one more time, I want to share this from Teilhard de Chardin. Love alone is capable of uniting living beings in such a way as to complete and fulfill them, for it alone takes them and joins them by what is deepest in themselves. Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, and the tides, we shall harness for God the power of love, and then, for the second time in history, we will have discovered fire. The fire is already there. It's in you. Claim it. Spread it. Let's start a conflagration of love. Namaste. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.